the International Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry and Allied Professions. I speak to you here in Kusadasi, Turkey. This is Kusadasi, right? Okay, and I have prepared a speech. And I know that there are people still filtering in. Please come forward and sit up front. And for those of you online, I understand there are only about 50 of you. I hope more will turn up because you're coming from, whether it's morning, afternoon, evening. Welcome to this 4th World Infant, Child, Adolescent Mental Health Day Symposium. So good afternoon, distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, both here in Kusadasi, who are live with us, as well as those joining us virtually from around the world. It is really my profound honor to welcome you to this 4th World Infant, Child and Adolescent Mental Health Day Symposium, which we have been doing virtually since the pandemic. And for the first time, we are now having a first in-person hybrid conference. It is to recognize this important cause. And this important cause, I can put in 3 main sort of phrases. Investing in young minds is really investing in humanity's future. The foundations of resilience, empathy, innovation, and leadership are really laid early in life. And mental health is the invisible infrastructure of tomorrow's society. Good mental health is our best refuge. Volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity will define the future. So nurturing mental well-being from infancy strengthens our collective adaptability. Our call to action is really safeguarding our young minds, safeguarding the world, because our young represents our future. The World Infant, Child, Adolescent Mental Health Day will remind us to advocate for the youngest amongst us in society and advocate for a healthier, safer, and more just world. So this year we gather under this theme, Bridging Worlds, Mental Health Support for Displaced Children and Families. First, I want to extend our deepest gratitude to our gracious hosts, the Turkish Association of Child and Adolescent Psychiatry, for integrating this symposium into their 34th National Congress. TACAP, or TACAP, I presume is the way you pronounce it, has been a steadfast advocate for youth mental health in Turkey since its founding in 1991. We'd like to thank the dedicated organizers, esteemed speakers, and the courageous individuals who will share their personal stories today. Your collective efforts make this day possible and meaningful. Second, our theme highlights the urgent mental health challenges faced by displaced children and their families. Displacement, whether due to conflict, both at home or nationally, disaster, economic hardship disrupts the foundational bonds essential for healthy development. These young individuals are at increased risk for trauma and anxiety and long-term psychological distress. As professionals, we must not only provide care, but also foster environments of inclusion and understanding between displaced populations and host communities. So finally, World Infant, Child, Adolescent Mental Health Day serves as a global call to action. Initiated by 4 organizations, the International Association of Child, Adolescent Psychiatry and Allied Professions, the International Society of Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychology, and the World Association of Infant Mental Health, as well as the World Psychiatric Association Child Adolescent Psychiatry section. This day aims to elevate the importance of mental health from infancy through adolescence. We urge other organizations worldwide to join us in advocating for policies and practices that prioritize the mental well-being of our youngest citizens. Together, we can build a future where every child, regardless of their circumstances, has access to the best support they need to thrive. Thank you for your commitment to this vital cause. Let us work collaboratively to bridge worlds and support the mental health of displaced children and their families. Now I'm going to ask each of the organizations that are supporting this very important effort to give some messages. So we will start with the welcome message by the WICAMHD President, Dr. Louis Roeder. Over to you, Louis.
Okay. Are you listening me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. So, good morning from Brazil. I had the privilege of being in several previous versions of the Turkish Congress of Adolescent Psychiatry and Allied Disciplines, and I am missing a lot my good friends from the Turkish Association. When I first noticed that the International Society of Adolescent Psychology and Psychiatry, the World Association of Infant Mental Health, and the section of the Adolescent Psychiatry of the WPA, and Daniel, representing us at the WICAMHD, selected the team Bridging Worlds Mental Health Support for Displaced Children and Families, my reaction was that nothing could have been more updated than this team. Why? Because we are living in a very complex world where displacement occurs everywhere and at every level. In our clinical microsphere, we see children and young people displaced from their homes to foster care due to several mental health problems of their caregivers, families displaced from their homes by drug dealers in big cities worldwide, children living on streets due to socioeconomic inequalities in low-middle income countries, and in the big context, we see climate changes causing environmental disasters like the one that we had here in Brazil last year, and you had in Turkey also, wars displacing families in different parts of the globe. We see powerful politicians displacing their citizen children from the country, yesterday even one with cancer, without clear reasons. What brings all these families on the same boat is the tremendous suffering, sense of isolation, non-belonging and fear. Lots of fear in the stories that we, as adolescent mental health professionals, listen every day. So let's all learn together how to face, overcome suffering, and help these families and their children to find their place in the world. We at WICAMHD wish a very productive workshop. We are very happy to be part of this initiative and to have Professor Daniel Fung being the leading force of WICAMHD on it. So, with this, I would wish you a very nice Congress and a very nice session. And Daniel, the podium is yours again.
Thank you so much, Louis. And now we'll move on to our next speaker, who is Professor Campbell Paul. He represents the World Association of Mental Health. He's the immediate past president, and he will be giving us a speech on understanding the infant and family experience of forced displacement, the role of mental health services. Campbell?
Thank you very much, Daniel, and thank you for the introduction and getting us started in this important conference and this important symposium. I'd like to advance the first. First of all, acknowledge that I live and work in Melbourne, in Australia, on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, who were occupiers and owners and carers for the country where I live now for some 60,000 years of continuous culture. I'm aware of the importance of history as we are here in Kusadisi and the area around how much change happens over time and how much communities, cultures, societies can be in conflict, can be in cooperation. So one of the key things I think of our symposium is how to build cooperation and support amongst different communities, some of whom have been at war in one way or another for many, many times. I acknowledge also people with lived experience of trauma and mental ill health and recovery, and the importance that supporters and consumers themselves have in the process of recovery from mental ill health. Just looking at the image on this poster that's on the screen on your right, I'm given to think about this young boy, this very young boy struggling through the mud from a camp all by himself. Maybe he represents much of the difficulties that many other young children and adolescents face, displaced from their homeland under presumably frightening, terrifying circumstances. The young boy in the image could probably tell us a little bit about his world and what had happened. He can put words together, but I don't think the words that he gives us would really take account of his actual experience. But what of the infant, the younger child, the pre-verbal child? How do we find out what their experience of displacement by war, by disaster like earthquakes, what are we going to learn and understand from their voice? What would the infant make of the terrifying journey to a seemingly safer place, to find that it maybe wasn't so safe, that their parents had to undergo huge trauma and massive dislocation to find somewhere where they can be relatively safe? The baby, the toddler, would experience some very perplexing changes. Changes in their physical environment, but most importantly, they'll be moving from a warm home maybe to a tent or a makeshift shelter, or maybe a house in a strange country. But what's most important is what happens for their parents and their experience. The environment for the baby, for the toddler, is very much the mind of the parent, as Winnicott would have led us to understand in many different ways. So I'm going to maybe speak, if I can be so bold, on behalf of infants and preschoolers, that they've got a right to be heard. Their voice is important to be heard, and in this context of war, disaster, natural and man-made, the baby is often one who's left out. We need to, as child and adolescent mental health clinicians and advocates speak for the infant and the young child, show ways of understanding what they can do. And we'll look at a few examples of children traumatised and how we might respond. There's a bit of a paradox, I think, in our work with infancy. Often we think that a baby is okay, physically they can be protected and they won't understand what's going on. But I think that's a very false premise on which to start. And it's our job as CAMHS workers, clinicians and researchers to look into that. We know that this is a huge area, and the more I was thinking about the context and coming here to Turkey, where you've got some 3 million children or more as refugees on the border with Syria on your lands, the concept of it is really overwhelming. How can we keep an understanding of the numbers of young children here and in Africa, in Sudan, in Eritrea, all over the world? As UNICEF tell us, there's something like 43 million children living in displaced conditions. Sounds enormous, and it is. And there's limited resources. What national responses are they? I know Turkey has been doing a huge amount to support children here, working with UNICEF and many other agencies. But there's a lot of countries where that's not happening or possible. There's many countries where there is no national plan for perinatal mental health, for infant mental health. So the burden of mental health on infants around the world is huge, and often we aren't able to conceptualise what that's like. I thought I might mention one brief vignette, and this is one out of millions, as I was saying, but a family fleeing from persecution, civil persecution and physical safety from a country in the Middle East, put together some money, paid a smuggler to get them out of the country and across through different parts of the world, eventually to Indonesia, where they paid another person to take them by boat to what they thought would be a safe place in Australia. They came to an island off Australia. They weren't allowed to stay as a function of our government policy, but they were brought to detention in Australia. The mother was pregnant during this journey in a very vulnerable boat across the ocean to Australia, managed to survive the pregnancy. The baby was later born in hospital in Australia. And because of the baby's frailty, and more importantly because of the experience of the whole family, they were allowed to stay for a while. Meanwhile, the mother was very depressed. She attempted suicide during pregnancy. The baby was not feeding well and had continued to fail to thrive. At 11 months was admitted to our hospital, extremely low in weight, way below the 0.01 centile. Was gaze aversive, not drinking, flat, atonic. We saw a baby who was severely withdrawn, severely depressed. We used a tool from our colleague in Paris, the Alarm Baby Distress Scale, as a way of measuring, a bit like the Edinburgh scale for mothers, a scale for looking at this measuring depression. And this baby was very depressed, needed to stay in hospital, and the hospital executive refused to allow the baby to be discharged, because if he had been, the whole family would have been deported out of the country. So he was in hospital for quite a while, made a good recovery. We got a chance to work with his parents, and in the end he was able to stay. But just to illustrate the impact of trauma, of the process of fleeing, the process of being stateless on the infant. And this is not an infrequent picture that we see. So why are we talking about infant mental health now? From the beginning of the first few days, the first months, we can see that babies are able to connect and under good circumstances you can see delight, love, playfulness, also anxiety, fear, anger and panic. Parents are the baby's window into the world, and they're also the window back into themselves. It's through their parents and carers that they learn about who they are in the world and in themselves. Infants experience, remember and are affected by trauma, and very young children have their own psychological defences in the face of trauma as well, and we'll look at some of this as we go. We also know that we need a lot more data about long-term impact of trauma on infants. There is considerable, but we need more. People have started looking at this very early on in our the development of mental health as a more formal discipline. During the Second World War in Europe, Anna Freud and Dorothy Birmingham. Anna Freud left Vienna to go to London, and she was working with a number of, well, many children who were evacuated from London in the busload during the Blitz, when the bombing was very heavy. They found that children were very distressed by the separation, and many of them were returned during the Blitz to their parents, where their mood settled much more quickly than people would have thought. So the idea of emotional safety was really very strongly edified and shared by Anna Freud and her colleagues. And she also stressed, as did others like Donald Winnicott and John Bowlby, the importance of directly observing the infant as a little person in their own right, and not just relying on second-hand accounts, which was a very powerful, made a powerful impression on Bowlby, the impact of war on children. He was commissioned by WHO to review the impact on children through Europe as a function of the displacement and the death and the despair of Second World War. And it led him to continue his search into understanding the process of infant and young child carer relationships, the importance of attachment. Others have approached it from a different perspective as well. This is reference to the work of the late Colwyn Trevarthen, looking at the development of the baby's capacity, the child's capacity to think about what's going on in the mind of the other, intersubjectivity, that we can demonstrate that the very young child has this capacity for reading the facial expression, the voice, the hand movements, the experience of parents, and adapt that within themselves and to learn about themselves in the process. And he illustrates this, Trevarthen, in the diagram there, and how this is a really powerful part of brain development, of which we have considerable data now. Trevarthen said infants have expressive creative mimesis. They're able to remember, they're able to member and express their memory, and to do it in a creative way. The capacity to express internal experiences, which are the infant's memory, and this expression is done through the baby's use of body, gaze, movement of limbs, vocalisations and other modalities. They find it hard to complete a questionnaire, but if we propose things to them in a way that makes sense, as it were, we can learn a lot from what they've got to say. We can talk with the newborn. Preverbal babies imitate and attribute intentions to others, even from the very beginning. Here's a picture of babies in the first day or 2 days of life with a colleague from Dundee, MC Naj, worked with Trevarthen. Newborns, and she's having a talk to them in the maternity hospital. The baby's in a little car seat. Oh, hello, how are you going? There's a baby talk between her and the baby. And the baby was watching. She'd move a little bit, the baby would track her gaze, she'd speak a bit more. And then she went quiet for a moment. The baby looked a little perplexed, and then she'd hold up one finger. The baby would copy and hold up one finger. She'd do the same again with another baby, or the same baby later. She'd put up 2 fingers. The baby would put up 2 fingers. So the baby could see that there was some intent in her movement, and was able to copy and, if you like, talk back to her to bring back that interaction. If she was to hold a still face for more than a few seconds, the baby would get perturbed. If that continued on, the baby would get more perturbed. They'd move around, they'd have different facial expressions. Oops. And we can see that even the very young baby is able to read the expressions of others. This is important in the context of displacement and babies reading the expression on the parent's face and body and mind. Preverbal participation by children is important, and we should give them the opportunity to do that. In fact, as an association, and I pass on my greetings from Astrid Berg from Cape Town, who's currently our president, but just to reiterate that the baby has rights for communication and talking with others as well. We also know that infants can suffer significant identifiable, diagnosable mental health disorders. This is one of not a lot. We need a lot more data from community surveys about infant mental health. But here's a group of 18-month-old infants from Copenhagen, one of a bigger series in this data. But basically it says that using verified, ratified tools, we can show that around 16% of, even in Copenhagen, toddlers at 18 months can have a demonstrable mental health diagnosis. We also know that maternal depression in itself constitutes a trauma. The baby is set up with a physiological, neurological, regulatory system, but it's a two-person one. If the key part of the system is missing, the mother, then this constitutes a trauma in itself. And we'll see this certainly in instances of dislocation, instances of war, where the parents are depressed and unable to provide the neuroendocrine, neurological, social regulation that the baby needs. And this constitutes part of the major worldwide burden. 10 to 20% or more of children and adolescents have mental health disorder, and that applies to infants as well. Moving to look at what have people done in trying to understand the infant's experience of war. I've just selected a few instances of interventions and research groups from work with infants, and in particular in Palestine, where there was work in the Gaza Strip and also in other parts, in Ramallah and the West Bank. And one of the programs has been recently undertaken on the West Bank. Sorry, it's gone blank. Out of range, what does that mean? I've got a blank screen here, but that's all right. I can just keep talking to my slides, because there's nothing there, but I can see here. Yeah, Emotional First Aid is a program that's been adapted from work with older children and work with infants and preschoolers on the West Bank, currently underway. Well, WAME is a collaborator in that project as well. Okay. Whoop. Thank you. And nearly up. This is an example of some very creative work done in Alexandra, in Johannesburg, an organisation called Uber Bailey, which provides home visiting services, intensive home visiting service, but creatively run by women from the community themselves. Uber Bailey is, Alexandra is a township, a very small area in the middle of Johannesburg, with a population of around 180,000 plus. People don't know how many people actually live there. They're mainly refugees and displaced families from across Africa. And they've set up a really creative training and intervention program. Particularly of interest here is the home visiting service, where a newborn baby or the woman at the end of her pregnancy is engaged with a peer worker. And I think this is really important learnings across many of the areas of work with displaced families, whether it's economic and cultural and persecution, or war or disaster, that peer workers are going to be a crucial part in intervention. Our colleague, Dr. Mariam from working in Cox's Bazar with a huge number of Rohingya evacuees, refugees who have been displaced from Myanmar, they've built a really powerful program using para-counsellors, as you call them, and play with peer groups and large groups, song, dance, etc., to make a huge difference, I think, into the experience of the child and family's experience of displacement. The key thing for all of our work is how do we put things up to scale? And there's a lot of learnings to be done there yet. But I know WHO and UNICEF have been working on this, and their program for improving early childhood development has built into it significant components around social and emotional development and the importance of building attachment. Things that become manualised and shared with on-the-ground workers. Linda Richter from South Africa has been instrumental in incorporating mental health for infants and young children into the child health programs that are around. And it just represents here, this diagram, the importance of mental health working closely with all of the areas of health and welfare. We can't do it alone, and that's especially true for infant mental health. So we, through WICAMHD, have been working with colleagues who are working with infants and families in crisis around the world. We have an online crisis working group coordinated by Prof. Berg, and welcome anyone who would like to participate in that. We will have Symposia at our next World Congress in Toronto next year. And a major focus will be on infants and young children displaced, as well as the impact of climate change and other major trauma. And a lot of these works are available through our online journal, the Infant Mental Health Journal itself, but we have our more responsive one, if you like, although IMH is pretty responsive, Perspectives, which is a free online journal, and much of the material I've talked about here is there. So at that point I'll finish. This is a painting done by a First Nations and Aboriginal artist, Richard Bell, in Australia. And it's a reference to how cruel and how horrific humankind can be. It's called 1 Hour of Daylight. And it refers to a massacre of Aboriginal First Nations people in Western Australia that occurred in the 19th century. It was only the fact that the sun rose that a number of the women and children and men who would have been murdered were not by the occupying force. So we know that cruelty and oppression and war has been with us for a long time. We just need to look out the door here to back to Greek, Roman and other times. And I thank you very much for your attention, and if we can give the infant and young child a voice, that's really important. Thank you.
Thank you, Campbell. Without further ado, I'm going to move us now from infants to adolescents, and we have our next speaker, Professor Fusun Chetin, who will be representing as President of the International Society of Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychology, the challenges of displacement for adolescents. Sure. Fusun, please. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, and thanks. We're happy to have you all here. I'm here as the speaker, as the president of the International Society for Adolescent Psychiatry and Psychology, but with my other hat also as the honorary president of the Turkish Association for CAP. I would like to mention that we really have this honor of hosting the first real and in actuality, fourth, the three were virtual, the first real world Infant, Child, and Adolescent Mental Health Symposium in Turkey. And thanks for Dr. Daniel Fung for this, the proposing of this organization. Okay. Now, we're in this small town on the west, on the side of the country, at the Aegean coast in Turkey. I'm going to speak briefly and in a schematic way, mainly about the challenges of displacement on adolescents and what kind of things we can do for them. So displacement, as you already know, is the forced movement of individuals from their home or habitat. This can be either in country or between the countries, of course, and is often due to conflict, violence, persecution, or natural disasters. And according to the United Nations reports, there is over 37 million of displaced adolescents globally currently. What it means for adolescents. You know, the meaning is important during the phase of adolescence. They would like to get a meaning in everything. And of course, displacement also has some meanings for them. So what it means? It means losing their community, house, relatives, friends, school, and others, but above all, their sense of belongingness, which is one of the most crucial developmental tasks in adolescence. And disconnection from their families, being forced to live in strange environments, uncertainty about the future, risking their basic sense of trust, facing various challenges. And what are the challenges now for adolescents? We can group these in four, basically. The first one is developmental challenges, and I'll go over each of those. You know, the developmental challenges of displacement is mainly the developmental challenges of adolescents which are more stressed by the conditions of displacement. That is the identity formation, self-integration, separation, individuation process, need for independence, need for belongingness, and social acceptance and peer relations. So, considering the developmental consequences of these situations, of displacement, is that there is a problem with the screen. I can't see it very clearly. Separation, individuation process of adolescence is disrupted traumatically if they get separated from their parents, of course. Or the other side, it is reversed if they are with their parents because they feel unsafe now, especially if they had to change a country. They need to stick to their parents more, which will delay their separation, individuation. Development of an independent and of invented self is blocked by being replaced in a refugee camp with some very strict rules and without being able to use any initiatives themselves. And being labeled as a refugee or displaced person can lower their self-esteem. Şuna bir şey yapabiliyor musun? Ya, tamam. And again, labelization can create a sense of hopelessness in them. Problems in social acceptance and peer relationship is another challenge here, and which yields to feelings of alienation and intensifies their search for belongingness, which may cause them to get involved in groups to find their identity in a way, but they can be some, kind of neglected ones. Okay. And this condition increases their risky behavior or their, acting out behaviors a lot. And the dual change they face now of integrating into a new environment while holding to their cultural identity creates a confusion about values and cultural norms, and complicates identity formation and self-integration processes, which is one of the most important tasks again, and thus resulting in identity confusion and a fractured sense of self. It doesn't work now. Çalışmıyor. Bu değil mi? Bu da mı tutacak? Oraya mı tutuyorum? Yok yok, hayır, şeyi değiştirmek istiyorum. Hala bununla değiştiriyordum hep de onunla. Okey, tamam, şununla ileri.
Bu geri.
Bu geri. Tamam, ona basıyorum ama değiştirmiyor. Çalıştı ama ileriye gitmiyor. Okay. Now, coming to the psychosocial challenges, losing the country and the loved ones, creates a feeling of loneliness that they had to face and, in a way, manage. And loss of the feeling of belongingness, as I said, and their need for involvement in social groups, and difficulties in meeting the cultural expectations of the host country if they are refugees again, and can create social isolation and stigma, and even worse, discrimination and bullying, or witnessing or being the victim of violence, or experiencing severe trauma. Can be other circumstances that they will face, and which can leave them in more social disintegration. And economic challenges, mainly the result of economic instability they're facing now in the places they moved, and unemployment, which strains the families, and because there are very limited jobs in refugee camps or in the urban areas where they're usually located. And this increased economic strain in families forces the parents to force the adolescents to take on more responsibilities to get money for the family and to work, and which consequently limits the adolescents' chances for personal and professional development and leads to a cycle of poverty and limited opportunities for future stability, and which can again end up for the young people as the loss of the hope for the future. There is a problem with this. Ya onu bas. Oraya basıyorum zaten. Okay. Okay. Tamam. Okay. Then we didn't skip it. Okay. So, what are the mental health problems as the consequences of displacement. First, it stresses their ego functions and lowers their emotion regulation capacities, which is again a very important skill to be gained in adolescence especially. So it kind of blocks that development too. And what we see as psychiatric disorders is mainly, and the first level is the most frequent, is the anxiety disorders, depression, non-suicidal self-injuries and suicide, and post-traumatic stress disorder, obviously, and substance use disorders, are seen more frequently in some groups of refugees, and they can withdraw or they can express violent behavior or other behavioral problems too. And the conditions of the displaced situation mostly prevents adolescents from seeking help and leaving them to deal with their pain and confusion alone, which obviously and inevitably increases their stress more. And involvement in groups provoking negative identity in the host country is another complication. Okay. However, there are hopeful things too. So, the research data shows that many displaced adolescents exhibit resilience and strength and develop coping mechanisms and find ways to adapt to their new environments. And again, the research done with especially the refugee adolescents show that self-esteem and resilience are the main factors determining their positive adaptation, along with the community support and peer relations, and also the access they will have to education system and mental health resources also can significantly enhance their ability to cope. Bunu sen çevirir misin rica etsem? Ben beceremiyorum. Okay. However, on the other hand, there are some barriers for them to get mental health support, though. Access to mental health services is often limited in refugee settings. Either there are no clinics for them or no trained individuals for this age group. And cultural stigma around mental health in their own cultural communities sometimes prevents them not to go and ask help. And language barriers, of course, and communication issues with the mental health providers is another issue. So, coming to what we can do for them, we need to consider the needs of the displaced adolescents first. So, promoting resilience and coping strategies is the first level needs again. And enhancing social skills and peer relationships, improving educational outcomes, and supporting them in the education system, that is, and providing job opportunities will be very important. So what can be the effective support strategies? These are carried in 4 levels. One is the individual level, and the second is the school level, the third is the community level, and the fourth is the family level. So individually, encouraging positive adolescent development is, can be done either on individual basis or in groups. And today now, digital media and mobile apps are being used widely for this purpose as well as other means. So mindfulness and mentalization skills training is very important. And Emotion regulation is another issue. Let me just down here. Oh, no. Okay. So, self-esteem enhancement, as I said, because it's an important characteristic that which also a very important factor to prevent the negative mental health consequences. And problem-solving skills and empathic skills need to be increased. Our school-based mental health programs applied in schools, the life skills training is one of the priorities, and super skills for life program is one that is widely used. And I'm not going into detail of this, but you can look them up because I picked up those which are widely used and which are more, evident, which provided evidence for us. So bullying prevention is another important issue, and WISC is the one, again, widely used around the world. And for violent behavior prevention, peer mentoring programs is found to be very useful at schools. Regarding community initiatives, again, peer groups for prevention of various dependencies in adolescence helps a lot, and opportunities for creative activities, provided by the host country, or like, music, art, writing, or drama, and support for language and cultural challenges is, of course, very much helping for them, for their adaptation. And the fourth level, I said, is family counseling and educational workshops, because we need to help and support parents in order for them to understand their adolescent children and help them to for their social integration. So positive parenting courses and is found really helpful for the parents, and mentalization-based approaches, comes to the front. Because this helps both the parents themselves to understand the mentalization patterns of the community now they started living in. Also helps them to understand their adolescent children's mentalization a lot more, increasing their empathic skills, sensing them, and also helping them. Can we change? So, since we're here all NGOs and international organizers as the speakers, and I would like to mention the role of NGOs and what can they do. And their NGOs contribute to the livelihoods of communities. I mean, they're especially displaced communities and families, and thus helping youth's adjustment in this way. And they can support youths coping with different stress sources, especially as a place of organization and coming together with other peer migrants. So helps them, kind of for their social relations and social integration too. And they can provide collaboration between the displaced groups and the local communities. They can bring the local adolescents with the displaced one, and they can run and preventive or intervention programs for mental health of youth, and they can form collaborations between local and international organizations as well. Thus, it's very important to support the development, the formation and development of the NGOs, where there are large groups of displaced adolescents. So I listed here just 5, picked up, again, the more commonly or widely used ones, but there are others, of course. You can pass. So, in order to do something for the displaced adolescents, we need to have some policy about the issue. And what we need for the development of, helpful or sustainable, I should say, policy programs is that we need to increase the awareness for the needs of displaced adolescents, and cultural sensitivity should be considered in providing support to them. Like culturally appropriate programs should be developed and involving displaced adolescents in designing those programs. So they will have a word in that. And respecting local customs and traditions, of course. And advocating for displaced adolescents' mental health is another issue. And we should do it both nationally and internationally. And encouraging collaboration between governments, NGOs, and communities, and supporting policies that prioritize mental health. So, in conclusion, displacement presents numerous challenges for adolescents, impacting their development, especially sense of identity, education, mental health, and economic stability. It is crucial to raise awareness about these issues and advocate for policies that support displaced youth. By investing in their education, mental health, and social integration, we can help them rebuild their lives and contribute positively to society. Okay. Here is also another list of international organizations working with displaced adolescents, mainly. So if any one of you would like to get that, I can send you the list. Yeah, and here are some references you can get. Okay, thank you. I wish you all successful work.
Thank you so much, Fusu.
Thanks.
Yeah, sorry for the technical problems. That's also a displaced tag is also another problem that we have in modern world. And now we're going to take a slightly sort of a break from the professional sharing and really have a special experience sharing segment. We are going to watch a video from the International Rescue Committee, where a Syrian teenager asks her mother about the courage that it took for them as a family to flee their home. So we're going to watch this video that's available publicly, but again, we will share all of this online with you eventually as well. Please go ahead.
I love you.
I love you too.
Even sometimes you make some trouble.
Yeah,
That's
because
fine.
we're still learning.
Yeah.
Still learning.
Do you know why we are here today?
So we're here today to share our life and how it has changed from when we were in Syria. Yeah, and share the memories. So tell me about when I was a baby.
You were very optimistic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And your face every time smile.
Oh.
Yeah. And I see the future when I looking to your eyes.
Oh, thank you.
And you, what do you remember about Syria?
I was young, but I remember a lot. I remember the food.
Maybe you are hungry now.
I remember the beautiful smell of jasmine, the markets, the people. I used to play with my cousins and have picnics and it was really nice.
Under the tree.
Yeah, under the trees. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very nice.
So how did our life change when the war started?
Completely changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, completely. 100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, because before the war, it was everything available. We have like house, car, good job, me and your dad. And just I leave my house for maybe 2-3 days.
Yeah, you thought that.
But I
We
have
left
never
everything.
go back again. Yeah.
I also want to say something. So when I was young, like before war, it was all good and stuff. And then you opened a gym. We thought it was like, it's like a new business. You're going to have a good life and everything's going to be good. Until that day, I still remember when war started. And I remember we just opened the gym. And then there were people shouting, saying like, go, you have to go, you have to leave. And then you got out, you were trying to lock the door, you held my brother's hand, my hand with one arm and the other one trying to lock the door. And yeah, I still remember that moment.
Yeah.
Now I feel like, yes, we should have left Syria. Do you think it's changed who you are, like the person you are? War, did it change the way you think?
Yes, yeah. I never think about travel before. I never think to leave my country before because everything was available. But during the war, you have to find safe life if you have family, especially children. And every time I was scared if my children go out, maybe not come back, or my husband go to work, maybe not come back. Every time, every moment.
Yeah.
I was very scared. So, yeah, it was very hard.
Also, because it was you
Who make that decision?
who made the decision for my dad to leave and who persuaded him to leave. So that's why you had all the responsibility if anything happens to us or to him.
Exactly. Every time I try to be happy in front of the people because I don't like to, but inside I was very worried, scared, maybe.
Even when my dad was in Syria, we were all already scared.
Exactly.
Now he's not with you.
Yeah.
Well, when he wasn't with you, you were obviously going to be more scared.
Yeah.
Yeah. What kept you going when things got hard? And how did you stay so strong?
You mean here or in Syria?
In Syria, like when dad left. Yeah.
So it took, I think, 6 months or more, 6 to 7 months without him, and to come to the UK and meet him.
How do you remember the 6 months? Did you feel like it was long or short?
Very long.
Yeah.
And like a dream, bad dream. But in front of you, I try to be happy and make something good. And I don't like to feel like sad or my dad not here.
Now when I think about it, I remember how strong you were. But I remember you were really happy when you got a call about when my dad arrived here in the UK at night. And
it was like 3 o'clock midnight. Yeah.
That's when I thought I saw your happy face.
Yeah. Tell me what arriving in the UK was like for you. What do you remember?
When I first arrived,
yes,
I saw my dad. I hugged him so hard.
Do you remember good things in the airport?
Yes. So when we first arrived, he didn't bring flowers, which is very bad.
What he bring?
But he brought a lot of chocolate.
Yeah.
They were all melted. It was really nice. I think and he said that you were his flower, so
and Zayn
flowers.
Forgot the package and
and Zayn left all our suitcases behind and just went to Dad. And we had to look for them, which is very. And I felt really happy. What were you surprised to learn about the UK when you first came here?
Driving license.
Yeah, the driving license.
Yeah.
Do you think that when you first arrived, that language would be the hardest thing.
I think so. Yeah.
Learning.
Yeah. Because sometimes people misunderstand something.
What do you mean? Yeah.
Because they don't know the meaning. Maybe sometimes I speak like something, but in good way, but they think this bad
That
way.
way, because they misunderstand.
This is different, very difficult.
Yeah.
Not easy.
It happens, definitely.
Noor, what has been the most challenging part for you? You still make challenge, I think.
Yeah, I'm still... But, well, firstly, schools. I was always thinking about schools, friends.
You were silent.
I was really shy, and because I felt like I don't want to speak because they might make fun of me of the way I speak, whether it's my accent or like the language in general. So I was just always shy. That was really challenging to overcome my shyness, and obviously to meeting new friends was also really challenging.
Trying to consolidate the photographs that I've been taking. Next, we come back to the professionals. We have Professor Matthew Hodes, who is an honorary senior lecturer at the Imperial College and also works as a consultant at the National Health System in UK. He's going to share with us his personal reflections on support for displaced children and families, what we've learned and where we're going. Matthew, please.
Well, thank you very much, Daniel, for the introduction, and thank you very much to the Turkish Association for Child and Adolescent Psychiatry for supporting this important symposium. Now, my talk comes just after the video presentation by the refugees from Syria into my own country, so you have a double dose of talks from the United Kingdom. But the 30 years referred to in this talk relates to the fact that I started this work in 1995, 30 years ago, at a time when the Yugoslavian war was at its peak, and there was a significant number of refugees from Yugoslavia, and particularly Bosnia, who came to the area of London where I worked. And at that time, I was the lead for service provision. I was called to a meeting by a school to ask how to support the Bosnian refugee children in that school. And around that time, there was very little written about the young refugee population in the United Kingdom and many other West European countries. And the work that had been done in the UK actually goes back to the time that Campbell Paul had just been speaking about the children who left London in the Second World War. So I was faced at a time when there was very little that had been established. And I thought, well, this just may be a blip, and the number of refugee children in UK and the United Kingdom and Europe may not be increasing. And I have to say, it's shocking and sad to see the massive increase in the numbers of refugees and internally displaced people that has arisen over the last 25 years, as you can see from this slide. We have the red bar of the refugees and the blue bar of the internally displaced. And the focus of my talk is going to be on displaced children and adolescents fleeing war and organised violence. Now, the increased numbers of young people who have been fleeing organised violence has resulted in a great amount of research and thinking on how to help and support these children. And this slide just shows the increased number of publications over the 40 or 50 years. And in particular, you can see here that the time when I was starting here, there's very little had been published. Most of the publications at that time had been authored by American investigators, mainly looking at young refugees from the Southeast Asian region, in particular Vietnam and other countries. There's very little in Europe and even on the Middle Eastern populations. So So what I'm going to be talking about here is what's been established in psychiatroepidemiology, in particular focusing on psychopathology, touching on risk and protective factors, and the way in which you need to have models to think about these processes. And finally, I'll turn to consider some aspects of service delivery, which will have some resonances with what you've already heard earlier this afternoon. Okay, so as you can see from this slide, the prevalence of mental disorders in conflict settings is about twice what it is in the general population, given the data given here at 22%. So if we say the general prevalence of disorder is around 10%, that's the number that's usually given in the UK and many other countries with robust criteria. This is twice the rate. And the lower part of the slide down here relates to a further review of high-quality studies carried out in resettlement countries. By high quality, I mean these are interview-based studies, not simply questionnaire studies that have established and shown these very high rates of disorder in children and adolescents. As you can see here, 22% for PTSD, depression just over 13%, and anxiety disorders at nearly 16%. But beyond the high prevalence rates of those disorders, we also see high rates of suicidality, both thoughts and deliberate self-harm, significantly elevated rates of psychosis, including not only in the adult population, but also the adolescent population, and with very high levels of comorbidity across these disorders. As a result of these exposures and psychopathologies, we see very high rates of high cortisol. This has massive implications, not only for understanding individual function, but also because of epigenetic changes, the transmission of these disorders, including PTSD, into the next generation. I'm not going to have time to go into that in this talk any further. What have we learned then about what actually it is that generates this very high rate of disorders? Well, this slide just summarizes the key points. Firstly, proximity to violent and threatening events associated with very high levels of personal threat, the repetition and persistence of those threats in the context of very low family and community support. Many of these disorders, in particular post-traumatic stress disorder, may have very long duration. Disorders like depression actually typically decline over time with integration of young refugees into communities, but the PTSD and the re-experiencing of war events may last for years or even decades. Secondly, it's been shown from this large number of studies that the kind of disorders we're talking about can be recognized universally. There have been a lot of studies which are sophisticated from a cross-cultural point of view, with careful translation of the instruments to assess disorders. And these disorders are recognized even if some aspects of the content may be a little bit different. The third finding from this range of studies I want to comment on is that most individuals are not affected in terms of experiencing disorder. Of course, they're all massively affected in the way our previous speakers have outlined. But in terms of disorders, even with the high rates I was showing, most are not affected. So one of the areas that's new is to consider why is it that some individuals are more resilient than others. And very recent research has started to unpick this, and the kind of qualities of those individuals include optimism and high self-esteem, which are strongly associated with higher resilience and lower symptoms, and poorer general health, including physical health, and difficult temperaments are associated with, maybe associated with more sensitivity to those environmental stresses. Now I just want to turn to look a little bit at things through the life course, We've already heard earlier on about the effect of wound displacement on infancy, but this looks at it a little bit more in terms of actual disorders. There have been a number of studies that have looked at parental mental health, in particular maternal mental health, including PTSD, and the strong association with insecure and disorganized attachment, which are important later predictors for peer relationship difficulties and lower self-esteem and psychiatric symptoms. A very important study from Australia actually has shown that there may be a very big impact of parental psychiatric disorder and hostile relationships with the child, including rejection, which are strongly associated with poor adjustment for the child. When we look at a later age, and this relates to adolescence, we can see there are very different kinds of implications for refugees, some of which have already been touched on, but just to summarize, in relation to family, there are major changes in family organization. So very often the refugee adolescents have integrated into the host community much more rapidly than the parents in view of school attendance, language acquisition, and so on. And they may be expected to take on roles that very often the sole parents, often mothers, have not been able to take on. This may change the nature of the relationship between the adolescent and the mother, and potentially later the father if there's reunion. Many of the changes in family life may contribute to poor boundary setting and regulation of affect, and poorer communication of expected behavior, and this may result in disruptions in the behavior, in particular by boys. If we move to look at a high level, at a more societal level, we can see there are massive impacts on neighborhood attitudes which reflect policies. We live at a time of great polarization in attitudes towards refugees, both in my own country. This relates to riots that occurred in the north of England outside an asylum hostel. This top one actually shows you the absurdity of some of the attitudes that are espoused and proposed even by government figures, which have a negative effect on reception of refugees. But given the polarization, we can also see very positive attitudes that may be shown. So what happens to refugees and asylum seekers is very diverse. And in fact, the two Syrian refugees who are being interviewed just there, in fact, I'm pleased to say I had a very positive experience of their life in Brighton, which is a town in the south of England. So the societal neighborhood effects are very varied. And this relates to major changes in asylum policy that have arisen in recent years. So 30 years ago, there was not such a polarization between those who are asylum seekers and those who obtained refugee status because of international agreements by NGOs, UNHCR, and governments in resettlement countries. The asylum seekers, who are what might be called irregular migrants, may have experienced very difficult, hazardous routes to the resettlement country, and on arrival there may be very low level of support and high levels of marginalization. This is true for many of the asylum seekers coming from countries in Africa and the Middle East. But the kind of schemes that have been set up in the UK and in many EU countries and other countries, including Turkey, have established more secure status for many refugees coming from countries such as Syria and in more recent years, Ukraine. So the experience of the Ukrainian refugees in the EU and the UK is very different to many of the asylum seekers who are coming from these countries, who may have experienced a much higher level of exposure to societal neighborhood adversities. So what are the theoretical considerations that we need to deal with? Firstly, in order to understand psychopathology as an outcome of this range of risk and protective factors, we need to consider cumulative risk factor models. These have generally been followed in much more recent research, as well as being able to incorporate within these models individual variation, taking account those resilience factors. What I'm arguing for, of course, is a biopsychosocial model which should inform your work as practitioners, as clinicians, in which you think about the range of processes that an individual, your patient, may have experienced, as well as models that are highly relevant for researchers. And as you can see here, we've already touched on individual variation, temperament, genetic and brain factors. We have family processes that have been touched on in this talk and previous talks, neighborhood processes, and then, of course, at the macro level, there are a wide range of societal processes which will impact on family life and therefore ultimately the welfare of the child and adolescent. Let's turn now to consider interventions. We need to think about interventions in terms of a tiered framework. And this slide just summarizes schematically how we can think about those tiers. And at the lower tier, tier 1, are some of the kinds of services that were outlined in previous talks, such as for those for families, higher support in schools for integration of refugee children, including language support, and welcoming entry into the school. A number of children at that stage may be identified as having distress. And then what should be provided would be outreach, community-based services for those who are distressed or may have mild disorders. Those who have more severe disorders, typically comorbidities with high impairment, need to be referred to child and adolescent mental health services, specialist services. And at a higher level, we have that small number who are very impaired who need psychiatric admission. So even though this is a tiny number, in fact, asylum seekers and refugees will be overrepresented in these services because of the very high level of stress and often low level of support that they have experienced. What are the challenges to service access? This slide just summarizes some of the main challenges. In some countries, cost and actual access of services may be varied or challenging. In UK and many other countries, actually being an asylum seeker, which is associated with high mobility, difficulty in registering with community or local doctors, we call them GPs, general practitioners, primary care practitioners, this may be highly disrupted by those who are asylum seekers and mobile. And then finally, we have language and cultural considerations, which may make access very difficult to negotiate. And quite a number of different understandings of psychological distress, which may be shared by many parents from countries which don't have the Western notions of psychological distress. When we look at schools, teachers, in fact, have a very important role in supporting children, identifying those who may have high levels of distress and may need referral to services. And we've actually carried out published a number of reports on involvement of teachers in identifying those with distress and how outreach services can ameliorate that distress by early intervention with outreach. Turning to treatments which may be delivered within that framework that I've outlined, of course, cognitive behavior therapy, which you will all be familiar with, is very important because of its application for depressive disorder, anxiety disorder, as well as post-traumatic stress disorder. It may be delivered individually or in groups. The advantages, of course, are that it's a manualized treatment. And then, in fact, non-mental health professionals can be trained to deliver CBT. Other interventions, in particular for post-traumatic stress disorder, are EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, narrative exposure therapy, interpersonal psychotherapy for adolescents, in particular for depression, play and art therapy in particular for those with milder symptoms, perhaps those who are needing to be integrated into schools or other settings. And there's already been discussion about the importance of family support. I've already mentioned the potential for training non-mental health professionals in mental health treatments, and that's going to be needed in order to reach the large numbers of young refugee and asylum-seeking children who may arrive in resettlement countries. The idea of task shifting actually is very well established in low middle-income countries, but in fact it's also needed in high-income countries, where in fact the service availability, even in a country like UK, which is a relatively wealthy country, is extremely poor, and I have to say, totally inadequate. So we need to have professionals who are trained in evidence-based therapies who may not actually have received a full mental health training. Finally, psychopharmacological treatments is needed often for those with more severe disorders, typically depression with comorbidities, sometimes suicidality, and it may be provided, of course, alongside psychological interventions and will follow the usual guidelines. I just want to flag up here one of the differences between the UK and USA, which may relate to differences internationally, which is in the UK, we don't use medication for post-traumatic stress disorder alone, whereas the Americans are much more open-minded about that, and other countries will have their own national guidelines. But these guidelines from the UK are based on the International Institute for Clinical Excellence, so these are systematic, rigorous reviews of evidence. Okay, this is my final slide. So what we've seen then is a broad range of difficulties and disorders which may occur across the lifespan. How these unfold will relate to the type of exposure and the individual's sensitivity, as well as family background support. In order to reach the needs of this large population, which may be arriving in resettlement countries, tiered systems of delivery, often with task shifting, is needed. We need much more research on psychological therapies, in particular digital therapies, which actually have potential, but in fact the level of evaluation is surprisingly poor. In particular, we don't have any data showing that the rate of completion of digital therapies by young people is adequate and results in a long-term therapy. Finally, I think actually over time we will be seeing drug therapies for post-traumatic stress disorder, and there's already quite a lot of research going on to understanding memory and the neurotransmission associated with memory, with an implication for newer drug therapies. Okay, I'm going to finish here, and maybe there'll be some questions later on. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Matthew. Thank you, Matthew. And